reporter David Nakamura and Roll Call's congressional reporter Meredith Shiner. Good Wednesday to both of you. And David, I'll start with you. You know, the president coming back for appearance sake, as some might say, or, you know, when we look at what he can do tomorrow, what might he have in the works here?
I think, Richard, to get a look at that, I think look back at what he said Friday, where he sort of scaled down his proposal. He said, I want a big deal ultimately, but before the new year, we don't have time. So I think what he's going to work, he's probably going to work with the Senate to sort of come up with possibly a smaller stopgap deal. You know, he still wants to lock in those tax breaks for the middle class, those earning under $250,000. But there also may be some temporary measures they can do to delay the mandatory across-the-board spending cuts, or put in some sort of stopgap measure and buy a little more time after the new year.
Yeah, you know, in addition, as a part of that smaller deal that you talk about, David, to you here, Meredith, there'll also be extension of unemployment insurance, perhaps also putting off the automatic cuts. And again, as David was noting, extending the tax cuts for incomes up to $250,000. Some folks are asking, though, Meredith, is this the best that they can hope for?
Well, so right before the president left for Hawaii, he had a meeting at the White House with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. And you're seeing both sides really dig in on what they want. And I think that the smaller package, at least before New Year's or right around the beginning of the year, is probably the best they can hope for. Right now, they're running out of time. Lawmakers aren't going to be returning to town, most of them, until tomorrow. The president won't be able to be back till tomorrow. And while most rank-and-file members won't be involved in the day-to-day negotiations of whatever this deal might be, they're going to have to vote for it. And you saw right before Christmas, Speaker John Boehner tried to move his own independent plan in which he was going to raise taxes on income levels over $1 million, and he wasn't able to do that successfully. And I think it was a big sign about the difficulties he'll have even wrangling the majority of his caucus. And so I think in order to get something done, anything done, to make sure that taxes don't increase on middle-class Americans, to make sure that these spending cuts don't start immediately, because a lot of lawmakers are leery of them despite the fact that they voted for them 2 summers ago, they're going to need to work small and then hope that they can set the infrastructure in place to maybe doing something bigger in 2013. Yeah,
you know, well and good. The question is, you're intimating here, Meredith, is who is going to be part of the wrangling, who's going to be the wrangler. And the last time, at least from what it looks like, anyone who talked about this deal, that was on Friday when that happened. The president then met with Harry Reid and talked to John Boehner by phone. And we've heard Harry Reid is working on legislation. Perhaps Mitch McConnell's involved in this as well. So when we look at this, David, who's pulling the strings now? Who is going to sit down and make this deal happen?
Richard, there's a lot of eyes on Mitch McConnell, as you point out. He's been, you know, influential in past debt negotiations a year and a half ago, and sort of coming up with something that his fellow Republicans would like. And I think the question is, though, as Meredith said, John Boehner does not seem to have full control of his caucus. And so when you look at the House, you know, is Boehner comfortable with moving something that maybe gets a majority of Democratic support and then some modicum of Republican support to put it over the threshold? You know, when you look at what's happening right now, it looks like there's a lot of sort of shifting going on about who to blame if we go over the cliff, and that's probably not a good sign, because they're already sort of setting up who to blame. That could sort of be an inkling of what's to come, that they think that they are headed over.
Well, you know, those votes that were not on the side of John Boehner and Plan B last week, Meredith, the question is, if there's a bipartisan deal that comes out of the Senate, will those who were not for John Boehner's Plan B, will they then agree with a bipartisan bill that might be coming over from the Senate?
Well, I think the question is, does it matter? If you look at all of the bipartisan agreements that have come this Congress, whether it was the multiple agreements to avert shutdown, whether it was that debt ceiling deal 2 summers ago, oftentimes it started as negotiations between the Speaker of the House and the President, and then it ended being mostly a negotiation between the 2 Senate leaders, getting enough Republican Senate votes to give people in the House cover, and then providing a lot of Democratic votes in the House to pass it. Because you're going to have conservatives in the House that aren't going to support any plan you put forward, no matter what.
Right.
And so you're definitely going to need Democratic support. And this idea that what happened last week with the Boehner backup plan meant that no plan will pass at all is a little bit misguided, because this is how we've seen this roll out every single time. It's just a matter of how large in scope can it be to get enough votes, because you can't go too far in one direction because you might alienate Democratic votes, and you can't go too far in another because you might alienate those more middle-of-the-road Republicans whose support Boehner is going to need.
Though some are saying it looks awfully intractable given the sequester, given the triggers that were put into this deal, and yet they're not being able to cobble some sort of deal. Stand by if you can, Meredith. Stand by, David, as well.